stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Man, my auntie passed last night. This is a sad life, I'm trying to get my cash right. Past bright, yeah, I'm shining like a flashlight. Trying to take off quick, might catch a fast flight. I'm mad tight, shitting on her with my ass wipes. Staying away from old friends, they all seem fake to me. Hating me, cause I'm getting dope.
You are watching BDEL 1014.
Yo, what's good, ladies and gentlemen? We are back with another transmission. If you're new to this channel, hit that like button, the share button, the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. In tonight's transmission, we're going to be talking about how the New World Order is set up at a culmination transitional convergence point to the point where it causes a final stage, which is the blueprint for National Socialism. Now, all this stuff coincides with the celestial apparatus when you're talking about the planetary bodies that basically interface with the gematria body here on planet Earth when you're talking about interface transitions, because during the time of an interface transition, that is basically the blueprint for a glitch within the metaphysical energies of the matrix system. So that interface transitions takes place when you have Mercury in retrograde, and then at the same time you got a new moon tonight, and then on April 1st you have the full moon. And now this is also interconnected to the star Regulus that's also in alignment with the Leo star constellation, and it's the brightest red star. That's what they say. It's the brightest red star that comes out of the Leo star constellation, and it basically amalgamates with the alignments of the Sphinx over in Egypt. So just based on my independent research, I believe that that's actually the personification of the great purification or conflagration of what they talk about in the Bible that is connected to the Hopi prophecy of the red star Kachina. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, put those rice bowls in the chat. We finna make everything make sense. Because one thing you got to understand when it comes to metaphysics, quantum physics, mind science, technology, celestial alignments, historical context, biblical context, all those things coincide with each other. Because this is what I tell Christians all the time. If you don't know history, you don't know that motherfucking Bible. And if you don't know the Bible, you don't pretty much know any history. Because you got to be able to map out the timelines to be the glitch in the system, the chosen ones who have the ability to see beyond the bullshit within the infrastructure of the matrix system. That's why it's important to understand the history of the planet and mankind's history, right? Because one thing you got to understand about this retrograde period, and then you got the new moon tonight that's also in alignment with Pisces, so that's the breaking of illusions, right? But the illusions started to take place when you had the inception of the lunar cycle, after you had the first sun cycle, because the lunacy of this planet is operated by way of energy and emotions, because your emotional energy is connected to people, places, and possessions. That's what your emotions is connected to. And a lot of times during the time of retrograde, it's going to take you through that circular loop. And that circular loop in itself is basically a negative aspect of a pattern system that's connected to the binary code systems of the matrix that harmonizes with your gematria body, right? So you live in a holographic, prison, basically, that basically pulls on the energy of your emotions. So that's why a lot of people are stuck in the orbit of dysfunction. They go through the same shit over and over. Because like I said, they're going to take you through many different tests. You're going to go through a political test, economic test, because the shifting process, that's basically what, retrograde is. It's basically to help you shift out of a certain frequency that is not acclimated to the old timeline, because there's a reason why this retrograde is also in alignment with Pisces, right? Because it represents the old world, because the old world was subjugated by the Piscean age of darkness that was also in alignment with the last lunar cycle, right? So all these celestial alignments right now work in tandem with everything that you see taking place on a political and a socioeconomic disposition level. So put the rice bowls in the chat. Okay, and then we finna get it, and then we're gonna do some Q&A. We're gonna do some Q&A also at the end. Okay. Now, matter of fact, I can put this back up. All right. Now, remember in one of my last transmissions, I was telling you that a red balloon is a clock with no numbers. Now we're going back into the star Regulus star system that's in alignment with Leo, that is also amalgamating with the Sphinx in Egypt. Now, this is what they call your personification of the Christ, because this new Christ energy, this star Regulus, is happening on Easter, right? It's happening on Easter. And then you also got the spring equinox coming up too. So you got all these new energies that's coming to the planet. And then you got the Schumann resonance spiking up that creates neutrinos, which are Holy Ghost particles. Holy Ghost particles is what activates the fire in the middle, which is the pyramid, which is the energetic frequency of the soul. So that's why I keep telling people all the time, this solar eclipse that's going to be taking place, that's also going to be in alignment with Egypt. And it's going to be, I think it's a 360 second solar eclipse that's going to be shown over in Egypt in 2027, because 2027 in itself represents the fall of the church, because you have the resurrection of man. That is the magnum opus, where human becomes God in the golden age. And that's what this whole blueprint, as far as like nuclear war, this biblical war that they basically trying to start to galvanize the greater Israel, which is connected to the abomination of desolation. So this is the energy that we in right now. We're almost at the apex, because it's kind of like the same story of Jesus. When you go to the book of Genesis and things of that nature, it talks about how Jesus, after the age of 12, he disappeared, and then he reappeared again when he was age 30, which gave him 3 years left to basically resurrect himself and to become his higher self. But that's also talking about the alignments of the body, because the timeline of the biblical context of Jesus, the Jesus story, is actually talking about your spinal column, right? And the reason I say that is because the 12th spinal column in itself, it gives in the third combustion to the 30th vertebrae, which is the three-eye atlas vertebrae, that gives an anchor effect to the 33rd vertebrae. So that's why I was saying, like, during this time period, you're going to be seeing a lot of energies, because the solar eclipse is also the personification of the black sun, which is Ophiuchus. So that is the resurrection process of man. So during this time, you're going to be seeing a lot of these political figures talking about the building of the third temple. So anytime they're talking about the Antichrist or their leader, Israel's leader, that's connected to the greater Israel, that basically lets you know in real time that the real Christ is starting to shift the energy in the ethers, right? So they telling you what time it is without telling you what time it is. You just got to understand the language. So their leader that's coming, when you get into their time moods and you read a lot of their context in the Jesuit order, when you read a lot of their publications, it talks about they have the building of the third temple. So when you're talking about the building of a third temple, it's actually talking about the resurrection of the carbonated beings on the planet that's connected to the mycelium network of the indigenous lands of America, which is actually ancient Atlantis. But that's a whole different transmission. Now you got breaking. Iran just made one condition to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Oil flows, but only if you pay in Chinese yuan. And that one sentence declared financial war on America. Now, this is going to cause a ripple effect in the economic infrastructure, because one thing you got to understand about China in itself, they're connected to the biblical context of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, Gog and Magog. That is the unification of Israel, not Israel, but Iran, China, and Russia, and other neighboring countries. So this can break America, which can manipulate, the great majority of the American socioeconomic disposition. So they just came out with this new Economist magazine on March 14th, and it's showing you in real time an attack on the world economy. Because one thing you got to understand about everything that operates within this infrastructure of the matrix system, it operates on a historical pattern. It's a concentric pattern that happens over and over again. So, and that is what I call the seculum of a cycle. So the last time that we had this interface transition was during the time of 1934. And that's where humans was transmuted into humanoid real estate, because you had the banks crash in 1928 during the Great Depression. So what you see taking place right now, they trying to crash the system to usher in a synthetic golden age that is controlled by the technocrats through artificial intelligence. Because remember after 9/11, a lot of us, what I'm saying, we was like really, we some little kids or whatever, but I remember, hearing people, on the news, and I remember hearing my parents talking about how they having mass surveillance, because 9/11 was actually the precursor to the Patriot Act, right? Because all these psychological operations lead up to something. It's basically the Hegelian dialectic principle: problem, reaction, solution. And they try to make it seem like, oh, it was Iraq is the problem, and then the tires get, crushed, and then the solution to that is the Patriot Act, to where you have mass surveillance. So the same thing is actually taking place in real time when you're talking about the biometric technology on how to cultivate these smart cities, right? They're trying to crash the timeline of the old world so we can step into the synthetic golden age that is controlled by smart cities. And then remember, they also said in the World Economic Forum that they wanted to build the smart cities in LA first, right? So it was not a coincidence that an Iranian attack on U.S. soil is likely, with thousands of vengeful sleeper cells in the country. Not a matter of if, but when, right? Now, I also talked about this on the African Spirituality podcast. But yes, there are sleeper cells in America, but you're also talking about this actually taking place within your physiology. It's more metaphysical than it is from a physical standpoint and from a political standpoint. Um, and I'm gonna get into that in a second. But the Iranian attack, as I was talking about California is gonna be the apex of where they're gonna begin the smart cities, because California is basically in alignment with Mount Shasta, which is the root chakra of planet Earth. So they want to subjugate the I guess you could say they want to subjugate the inception of the etheric energy that comes from the base of the spine of the planet. They want to subjugate those energies first. So that's why they want to build the smart cities there. Because in order to go from lead to gold, what I'm saying, you gotta, it takes place with the root chakra first. So that's why you got so much hedonistic activity in California. So they want to build the smart cities in California first. So that means that they're going to perpetuate the great majority of their psychological operations first in California, because in order to raise up the frequency of the planet, you got to raise it up from the root first. You don't go from the crown to the root. You go from the root to the crown, right? So that's actually taking place within us also. And now, one thing you got to understand is that this is the guy who purchased. Yeah, this is the guy. Yeah, his name is Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein, who is an Ashkenazi. The only day Larry Silverstein missed work was on 9/11. And mind you, he owned these buildings, but also he just purchased this building right here in California. So this is the biggest tower in California. So Larry Silverstein, about 6 weeks ago, purchased the insurance for the United States Bank Tower in California, in LA, which is also locally known as the Library Tower. Now, this is where we get into the metaphysics of it, because they're telling you what time it is. Yes, there's a library tower building, but the library tower in itself is basically an emulation of the motor cortex gland of the brain that's connected to the hippocampus, because the hippocampus layer of the brain is a representation of the conscious memory bank, right? Which is also interconnected to the epigenetic body to help you break out of the gematria body to where you tap into the Sahu body. So what I'm saying is that the Tower Bank in itself is basically a replica of the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel in itself is a representation of the motor cortex gland that's connected to the hippocampus. So when you have the attacking of the tower, because a lot of these towers and these buildings that's built in the infrastructure of the matrix, a lot of them was built on certain dark energy ley lines to block out energy to where you weren't able to resurrect yourself, right? Just like hypothetically speaking, they build certain churches, McDonald's, certain cathedrals, certain Freemasonic buildings. They build them on certain energy points to basically suck up and galvanize the energy, to stagnate the frequency of the planet, which basically puts an encryption over the little gods, basically, what I call the microcosm of the macrocosm. Psalms 82, verse 6. So it basically gives it an encryption over the planet to where you're not able to become your higher self or your God self, to where you basically have a energetic balance, equilibrium, because equilibrium in itself is what represents God. So a lot of these energies that's coming in, these buildings, a lot of them is going to get torn down, right? So this is basically in alignment with biblical context. This is why I keep telling people the perception of our imitates reality, because the scripture has to follow the script that's according to Hollywood. Now, also, this building was also destroyed in the movie San Andreas, in the movie, and also in the movie 2012. There was a helicopter in the movie that hit the top of the building, and then the building basically exploded. So you got to watch the movie San Andreas. So it's basically telling you how everything is taking place, but they're not telling you that America is modern day Babylon, because I told you that America is Nineveh, and Nineveh was connected to the Assyrian Empire that was also interconnected to Babylon. And Babylon, the Babylon Tower, the Tower of Babel, is a replica. Well, the United States Bank Tower is a replica of the Tower of Babel, right? So if this building gets hit, that's owned by Larry Silverstein, that basically purchased the 9/11 buildings, they're basically telling you what time it is. Because if in order to create this perception and ideology of a war, you got to start from an economic standpoint first. That's why The Economist putting out this magazine, an attack on the world economy, right? So because like I said, it's going to manipulate, is going to cause a financial war, because in order to create a technocratic system that is controlled by artificial intelligence and technology, you got to crash the old system, just like they crashed the old system in 1934, where they had the humanoid real estate once the markets and everything crashed in 1928. So if you understand the timeline, everything as far as like wars, it all starts from a financial aspect first. So I'm gonna show you some videos here. So this guy, Larry Silverstein, purchased the 430 million dollar United States Bank Tower in Los Angeles in 2020, and he's also the same guy who bought the 9/11 buildings, Twin Towers. But I'm gonna show you this video for a second.
After 9/11, we are back to Muslims across the country crying about Islamophobia. It's everywhere. How dare we be afraid of radical Islam? Why in the world would anyone be Islamophobic?
Now remember the governor or the mayor, I believe he's of Arab descent as well. So what you're looking at in real time, this is nothing but a setup. And also, I think his name is Madani. He's also the son of Epstein. So there's also, a political esoteric, connection when it comes to that. But that's a whole different transmission.
Where is that? No, that's not Iraq. It's not Afghanistan. That's Times Square a few days ago, the crossroads of the world, the place where the ball drops New Year's Eve, which, by the way, would be a violation of Sharia law, playing music and celebrating, if it were anywhere in the Muslim world. Never before have we witnessed a scene like that in the middle of America's largest city. So why would that make some non-Muslims uncomfortable? Why would normal, everyday Americans who just want to go to work and then go home to their families think a scene like that is somewhat threatening? Because no other religion puts the world under constant threat of death and destruction like Islam. Quotes from the Quran repeatedly call for bloodshed.
See, they'd say some shit like this, but they won't tell you that the Pope is the viscera of all religions. The Pope is the viscera of all religions, so he controls the great majority of the aspects of monotheistic religions and what they perpetuate in their doctrines, and where you got to go to seminary school and all this other stuff. That is connected to the keys of papacy. because the keys in itself is the knowledge within the infrastructure of the books that basically puts you under subjugation, mental subjugation, right? So they talking about all this, anarchy and all the stuff that's connected to the religion. It's the religion that the black nobility created. It's a setup, right? Because like I said, in order to be a Freemason, you gotta subscribe to some type of monotheistic belief system. You got to be connected to some type of monotheistic belief system in order to become a Mason, right? So that's how you know this is all bullshit. Put the rights bows in the chat. Illuminati, we on to you.
Kill the idolaters wherever you find them. Kill the Jews. Kill the infidels. Right now, we're seeing the results of this once again in cities and small towns across the United States. And of course, as always, the inspiration is the perception of the Western world attacking Islam.
This is the most important war for the world since World War II.
Now, why is he saying that? Remember, Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, Gog and Magog, the unification of the Persians of antiquity, modern day Persia is Iran, amalgamated with China and Russia, right? That's why they keep telling you that, this war is God's war. This is God's divine judgment, right? This is nothing but a script, right? Because I told y'all in the last transmission on how Kamani, his bloodline is esoterically connected to Queen Elizabeth's during the time after the Babylonian exile that was implemented by Cyrus the Great, who was the Persian king. So he amalgamated those bloodlines. All world leaders are related. And the world leaders are the ones who created the infrastructure of the religions that is also connected to the Vatican. And the Vatican have to give off this illusionary perception of a prophecy that's interconnected to all the belief systems and all the great majority of the religious contexts or whatever in the books. So all this stuff is nothing but a plan, right? You got to read Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, because he talks about how you're going to have the amplification process of World War III. It talks about how the inception is going to start and how you're going to have the Islamic State going to war with Israel, right? So this is why they keep telling you that this is a biblical war, right? But you also got to understand that their personification of God is acclimated to Yarabav, who was Renfran, who was Moloch, who was Baal, who was Enlil, who was Yahweh in the Bible, who talks about sacrifice. So that's why everything is based on sacrifice on this planet, because the sacrifice in itself is basically the blueprint for the Great Reset, right? Because you can't just, because anytime you have a planetary adjustment, as far as like a spiritual metamorphosis, I keep telling people all the time, when you look at the precessional circle of the equinox, when you go from the Alpha Draconis star system to the star Polaris, that is your personification of the shift. That is the shift. That is the shift that puts you under solar cycle 25 during the time of the Aquarian age. Because that shift represents a shift in government, a shift in power, a shift in everything that's connected to people, places, and possessions. So that means that you got to shift from the third dimension to the fourth dimension and so on and so forth. So that's what that's talking about. So the collapse of their religion, they already knew this was going to be taking place. So there's a reason why Yaqub, he said, I will create a people that will rule over you for 6,000 years, right? For 6,000 years. So that they already knew that this whole doctrine was basically bullshit, right? So I'm going to keep playing. So this is why they say this is a biblical war, because their ancestors are the ones who created the infrastructure of the war that's connected to their monotheistic belief systems.
War for the world since World War II. This is a war to get to peace. It's a war for peace. World War II was a war to get peace and get rid of the Nazis. This is a war to get to peace and to do something about literal interpretation of the Quran and radical Islam. In fact, one of the reasons that Iran is hitting these other Arab countries, which makes no sense to everyone, is that they believe in the Mahdi. They believe that Islamic Messiah will only come if there is extraordinary chaos in the world. So this is their religious belief. That's why they will not give up until they have no choice. And we really have to understand this. And remember, these people are the biggest funders of Islamic terrorism in the world, the biggest they provide arms for terrorists all over the world. That's why we've had all these terrorist attacks throughout the world. This is primarily funded and armed by Iran and their supporters. So people really have to understand this. In fact, we have a problem in this country. In the mosques in this country, many of the imams are calling for war and fighting against Americans. They're American citizens, and that's what they're doing. This is something we have to really deal with right now. But this is a war we all have to be grateful that Donald Trump has done the right thing to protect the world from the curse of literal interpretation of the Quran and radical Islam. That's what this is.
It's a war with impacts being felt around the world. Just over 2 weeks ago, the US and Israel attacked Iran and killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. It was the start of a regional conflict that's continued to increase in scale and severity. Airstrikes have killed hundreds of people and displaced millions more. Gulf nations have come under unprecedented attack, and global energy markets are facing increasing uncertainty.
Our tax refund warehouse sale is happening this weekend at Evansville Overstock Warehouse. For the popular...
Large plumes of smoke were seen rising from the city on Sunday morning. A military plane has also been seen flying ahead. The region was heavily bombed on Saturday with one airstrike at a factory, killing at least 15 workers. Now, Tahid, just talk us through the Iranian threats on Gulf nations. There has been, talk of those threats being, coming down in nature, calming down in nature with the missiles not flying over Gulf cities. But there also has been strong talk of using America. If any base was used, an American base was used, it was a fair target.
Sami, of course, since the very beginning and even before the initiation of these strikes, Iran said that in case of a U.S. attack, there is going to be repercussions for regional countries, and there's going to be a possibility of regional war. A full-fledged, all-out scenario for the entire West Asia was something that Iran already talked about in case of an escalation.
But that was a strategic miscalculation, because now we are seeing the Gulf states, for the first time in our lifetimes, willing to work alongside Israel and the revival of a possible Abraham's Accord 2.0. So if you don't understand what Israel is to America, just look at it like this. Israel is basically the personification of Suge Knight, and America is Tupac. Just look at it like that. Because, Israel is basically, they represent, the whole, their record industry or whatever. That's how you know who's controlling who's telling who what to do what. So like I said, this is why they call it a so-called biblical war. Just look at it from that standpoint, for those who don't understand. As a coalition can maintain the pressure on Iran and ultimately a regime change happens, we are going to see a completely different Middle East. But this is, to your point, always been Iran's playbook: cause economic strain to the world when they can't fight state to state.
Most windows are dark in this building housing Citigroup. The US banking giant, along with Britain's Standard Chartered and consultancy Deloitte, told their staff to evacuate offices in Dubai's financial centre. Another British consultancy, PwC, closed offices in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE and Kuwait. Separately, HSBC temporarily shut down all branches in Qatar to ensure the safety of customers and employees. It's not just the financial sector that's been caught in the crossfire. The city's lucrative wholesale and retail trade, as well as real estate and tourism, have all been hurt.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard said today they are targeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In a statement, they said, if this child-killing criminal is alive, we will continue to pursue and kill him with full force. While keeping up the attack on Iran, Israel's also fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. I note Turkey's foreign minister today accused Israel of using this as a pretext for, and these are his words, another genocide. So two questions for you. What are Israel's objectives in Lebanon? And what do you make of Turkey's accusations?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that one of Hamas's main state sponsors of terror is now giving its backing to another terrorist group, Hezbollah, by spreading the racist genocide hoax that has fueled political violence against Israelis and Jews all around the world. Israel wants Hezbollah to stop shooting at Israeli families. It's as simple as that. The Lebanese government was supposed to disarm Hezbollah under the ceasefire that ended the last war in 2024. Heck, the Lebanese government was supposed to disarm Hezbollah under the ceasefire that ended the 2006 war, and they haven't done it, and they dragged their feet, and they chickened out of a confrontation with Hezbollah. And now we have an Iranian proxy army that is within anti-tank missile range of Israelis sitting on their front porch on the northern border. Israelis cannot go home safely because their houses are getting bombarded. They're under non-stop missile fire. And Israel wants to remove that threat and make it go away. And I think Lebanon needs to make peace with Israel. It needs to join the Abraham Accord.
So that being said, I had to show you those demonstrations, and we're going to get back to the transmission. Put the rice bowls in the chat and get the likes up in the building so we can push the video on the algorithm. Got to beat the algorithm. Because we in that great awakening period, ladies and gentlemen. So we got to break their reality by pushing these types of videos in the algorithm. So they're showing you in real time. You're going to have the activation of sleeper cells. And the same guy who purchased 9/11 purchased this building in California, and this building is also known as the library tower because the library in itself is connected to the memory gland of the hippocampus layer of the brain, which is also connected to the motor cortex that is also an emulation of the Tower of Babel. So that's why in the Tower of Babel, this is why they said, when the Tower of Babel fell, that was basically a neural network energy mental encryption to the point where it basically subjugated the minds of the people to where they started babbling. Because before you had the Tower of Babel, before it fell, everybody had, this energy of telepathy. It wasn't no need for language. So that's what caused the great majority of the confusion during the time of Babylon. So then you also have the FBI warns of Iran inspired attack California with drones and retaliation for war. Now, like I said, the same building is also in California. The same building that was purchased by Larry Silverstein, who is a Albion European, and Iran, their jets and their drones look like an emulation of the kamikaze drone in America. It's basically a direct emulation. So it could be a mistake. Or be like they can be like say some shit like, "Oh, we thought it was one of our planes. We thought it was one of our drones." That's how you know that a psychological operation is starting to brew up to where it causes confusion. And then also another thing about Iran. Iran is also on a dark energy ley line, which is ley line 10, where you have Stargate 10 by the Shah Alat Arab, which is the Stargate zone. So that's another reason why all this stuff is going on as far as like the geopolitical situation between Russia, China, Iran, and in America. Now I got this other video because I don't want to go too far in the transmission. I got to show this video first.
The Hezbollah leader taunting Israel, even as their rockets rain down around him.
Complicating matters, sandstorms and 100-kilometre-an-hour winds, reducing visibility, disrupting aircraft operations and making dangerous missions even more fraught.
As Israel and Lebanon were blanketed and Gaza, with its tented population, was hammered, the faces of the 6 crew killed in the refueler crash, a likely mid-air collision in congested airspace. Images that will ratchet the political pressure on President Trump over a war with no end in sight.
Have you been briefed about how many Iran sleeper cells there could be inside the U.S. right now?
I have been, and a lot of people came in through Biden with this stupid open border. But we know where most of them are.
See, this is all nothing but a Ponzi scheme. You know that, right? So like I said, the Democratic Party, who was also interconnected to the deep state shadow government, open up the borders. because they knew it was kind of like a sabotage in itself. Because some people were gonna be like, "Oh, they trying to sabotage Trump," but no, this is nothing but a script that they basically following anyway. So they let the borders open for a reason, to subjugate, the financial infrastructure that leads up to inflation and things of that nature, and the scarcities of the job market. So not only that, it subjugates the economic, standpoint, but it also is the beginning points of sleeper cell activation. So that's why I keep telling y'all to watch the movie Red Dawn. You're going to be infiltrated from the inside out. No civilization can be conquered until it's conquered from the inside. That's how it always happens. Just like people say that 9/11 was an inside job. So whatever psychological operations are going to be taking place on American soil is going to be an inside job, right? Because I keep telling people, Donald Trump is the 9/11 president. He was the 45th president, and he's the 47th president. 4 plus 5 is 9, 4 plus 7 is 11. 9/11. So a 9/11 event is going to be taking place on his watch. So that's why people got to understand that his third term is the personification of the building of the third temple. So you got to understand that. So all this is basically biblical context, connected to a form of metaphysics. So you got to understand the symbolism in order to understand the timeline of eschatology. So I'm gonna keep playing this video.
Inside the U.S. right now.
I have been, and a lot of people came in through Biden with this stupid open border. But we know where
and this another thing. If you know where most of the sleeper cells is at, and you really trying to resurrect the country and keep us safe, won't you go get their ass? Like, why? If I know where my iPhone is at, if somebody stole my iPhone, and I know whoever the motherfucker that stole my iPhone, and I got the tracker on, I'm gonna go get it. So if you know where these motherfuckers is at, why aren't you going to get them? Because they need a psychological operation. They need a sacrifice. They got to create this illusion of a Hegelian dialectic principle. Problem, reaction, solution. Who's the problem? Iran. What is the reaction? They bomb something on American soil. What is solution? Their solution is a synthetic golden age built with smart cities in California. That's how they doing this shit right there. That's how you gotta see it. Problem, reaction, solution. That's how you know it's a psychological operation, because they want to put the smart cities in LA first, because that is the root chakra. And a planet cannot resurrect itself if there's an encryption over that geographical landmass with cryogenic technology, because technology is what locks down DNA. It locks down the DNA of the chosen ones, and it locks down the DNA of these planetary systems. Because one thing you got to understand about the resurrection of the planet, it operates through the 4 horsemen, which is the 4 basic elements: earth, air, water, and fire, which causes sedimentary rock formation. So it's almost to the point where it's like they want to hurry up and build a smart city there before they have that big ass earthquake, because the great majority of California is going to go underneath the water. They showed you in the movie Escape from LA, right? And that also talks about the El Nino non-weather. The El Nino non-weather is the non-ether weather, to where the waters from the east collaborate with the waters from the west, right? Which is basically spiritual metamorphosis by way of the waters. I'm going to keep playing the video.
most of them are.
It's a thing that everyone's been talking about in this country this week. President Trump saying we know where most of the sleeper cells are.
Authorities recently detected a mysterious encoded shortwave radio broadcast believed to have originated in Iran shortly after the reported killing of Iran's supreme leader on February 28th. The broadcast, a sequence of numbers transmitted globally, resembled so-called number station signals historically used to communicate with covert operatives. Investigators say the transmission could have been intended as a potential trigger for sleeper cells.
Chris, Donald Trump claims Iran has reached out.
Now, you got to remember something. You got to read this book right here. I just got it the other day. I'm going to put y'all on some books. Got to get this book right here. The Kemetic Tree of Life, right? Because it goes into the metaphysical energies and cosmology of your gematria body. So a lot of these sleeper cells that they talking about, yeah, you have sleeper cells in the country, but it's actually talking about the sleeper cells within your genetics. So whatever takes place in the matrix, as far as people, places, and possessions, is actually taking place within your physiology as well and your neural network. So yes, you got sleeper cells in America, but what about the sleeper cells in your body that activate the junk DNA, right? The junk DNA that they said is asleep. Because like I said, every time you go through the 80-year theory, there's an interface transition that basically takes place to where you have a new intelligence that unravels the DNA that was basically subjugated during the Piscean age of darkness. So since we're going through the unraveling process, now the DNA has to shift because it has to harmonize with the cosmos, right? Because that's the only way you can get an energetic balance. So your energy has to be acclimated to the cosmos. So that means that your mental faculties by way of mind science technology has to harmonize with the magnetosphere, right? So like I said, everything is all about balance. So a lot of these sleeper cells is actually talking about the activation of you, because 2027 is the fall of the Vatican Church, which is basically the precursor to the collapse of the great majority of all monotheistic religions. Because that's why I kept said in the beginning, this is actually they're trying to set up a system that is based on national socialism, because national socialism in itself is what stagnates religion, to where they create a one world religion that's based on a hedonistic concept and and also from an energetic slavery standpoint too, because like I said, you ain't gotta have no motherfucking money to live in a smart city, because it's not about the money, it's all about control. They just want to control individuals to where they can hit that reset button on your body if you don't conform to the system. They can be like, okay, let's kill him, let's get him up out of here. That's why they got a lot of those the cryogenic technology that they had inside the draconian juice. A lot of it it has a kill switch button on it, but that's a whole different transmission. So I'm gonna keep playing this video. So the sleeper cells, you got them in America, but we also talking about the sleeper cells that's getting activated within your physiology. Microcosm, macrocosm. So when they telling you about something in the matrix, best believe that shit is taking place in your body too.
With a peace deal.
Good evening, Sam. That's correct. US President Donald Trump has spoken with our media affiliates, NBC, telling them that he has been approached by Iran with the terms of a peace negotiation, but he's rejected that offer, saying that the terms aren't good enough yet. He also went on to doubt whether or not the new supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, is even alive.
Windows were shaking, my dogs went ballistic.
Ring video captured their reaction as the choppers thundered overhead. Even in a city known for its military presence, she says this sight was unusual.
When you start seeing transport choppers like that in your area, it makes you pause and go, what's going on? What's going on? Do we need to prepare for something?
Neighbors around Fresno look to the...
And mind you, everything is a timeline. It's a script, right? Because the movie Doomsday comes out in December of this year, actually. The movie Doomsday Avengers, right? And I think the last Avengers that came out, that was called the Endgame, because that was the end of the Piscean age. But you get Doomsday, which is the abomination of desolation during the time of the Aquarian age. So this is why they flying the Doomsday plane over California, right?
Sky Sunday afternoon to see a large, unmarked airplane flying unusually low, circling the area. The plane, identified as a Boeing E-6B Mercury, is known as a Doomsday plane.
A roar in the sky that kept getting louder. It happened close to 6:30 Monday night. Melinda Haynes was in her front yard with her daughter and granddaughter when they heard it.
She was like, what is that? What is that?
What the f?
Then I could start hearing the rumble.
Seconds later, a formation of 8 helicopters came into view, headed north.
These planes were designed during the Cold War. And just to give you a little perspective, this is how big I am, and this is how...
Now, mind you, hear what she said. These planes were designed during the Cold War, right? So why are you designing planes like that? It's like they foretelling something without telling you something's going to be taking place in the future. Because I'm also listen to what the guy says about what type of technology that is able to deviate from in the video.
The Doomsday planes are.
Essentially, it's an airborne control for all of the nuclear triad or the nuclear systems of the United States.
That's retired Air Force Major General Clay Garrison. He told us what these planes are used for.
Manages the nuclear forces from an airborne command post in the event that the command post on the ground at Offutt was taken out in a surprise attack, if you will, or if it's just out of service.
The planes are built to withstand electromagnetic pulses, like what would come from a nuclear reaction. They can stay in the air for long periods of time.
See, basically, she just said electromagnetic pulses. So they already knew about EMPs during that time period. They already knew about electromagnetic pulse deficiencies. So a doomsday plane can basically fly during the time of an EMP. So in reality, why not give everybody that technology so they can combat the negative, forces that's going to infiltrate American soil? Why don't you give them the resources so they can be in, stay in survival mode? I don't know. I'm just looking at it from that standpoint. Maybe that's just, why not give everybody the same technology? Why not? That's how you know this world is fucked up. That's how you know right there.
Even refuel up there and operate as a nuclear command center from the sky.
So they can control the bombers if the bombers are on alert. They can control the missiles because the missiles are always on alert. And obviously they can control our ballistic missile submarines. It's all combined into one.
The reason for the flight over Fresno is still unknown.
While the sight caught many off guard, the Army tells KENS 5 it was part of routine training. In a statement, Army officials say the helicopters were part of training exercises around Joint Base San Antonio-Lackland Monday and Tuesday, conducted under strict safety protocols.
See, we're hearing jets. That's a normal thing.
Haynes says she understands training is part of living in Military City, USA, but says residents usually get a heads up when large exercises are planned.
I wish there was some way, as the public, we could get some kind of heads up, because it's likely to cause a lot of panic.
What the
Fort Campbell, Kentucky is home to the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, often known as the Night Stalkers.
Authorities across the country are on a high alert after two crime rocked the U.S., starting in Virginia. An ROTC student taking down a suspect who opened fire on a classroom, killing one person. The FBI, revealing sources, said that the suspect said Allahu Akbar before the shooting. Just hours later, a suspect ran into a Michigan synagogue.
Bro, this is how you know all this is nothing but psychological operations. It's like they doing this on purpose to coincide with the script on Morals and Dogma, where Albert Pike, where he said verbatim, the Islamic State going against the Western world, or the Zionist, which controls the Western world. So it's showing you the script in real time.
Before exiting with a rifle and what agents are calling a targeted attack, security shot and killed him. James, good to see you, brother. I just want to show you this growing timeline, and we're hoping that we can nip this in the bud. But March 1st, you had that bar shooting in Austin, Texas. Saturday, attempted bombing in New York City. And then Thursday, the synagogue attack in West Bloomingfield, Michigan. And of course, Thursday, the Old Dominion University shooting in Norfolk, Virginia.
And then remember, you also got 322 coming up, which is the Skull and Bones initiation, right? Right after the spring equinox. So you're going to see a lot of sacrifices in between the spring equinox all the way up into the time of the end of April. That is what they call sacrifice season, right? So, pay attention to a great majority of these psychological operations that happen during the time of the spring to basically stagnate the resurrection of the planet.
Virginia. This is spanning across the country and looks like most of all of these motivations are radical Islam.
Related and inspired attacks. And why is that? Well, propaganda and attention is the coin of the realm in the terror business. And doesn't want Hamas and Hezbollah getting all the attention. So I think now more than ever, we need to pay attention to these potential lone wolf attacks.
16 days in, and Iran claims it's no reason to talk with the US as the war in the Middle East shows no sign of slowing down. Over the weekend, Donald Trump claimed Iran wanted to make a deal, but he wasn't prepared to reach one because the terms weren't good enough.
Week 3 of the war. The US intensifies its campaign and Iran promises more revenge. Trading blows, here attacking the US embassy in Baghdad, now accusing Gulf states of joining the war.
They have done it from the soil of our neighbors.
Swiftly punishing Dubai, drones targeting oil terminals in the financial district, declaring they're coming after US companies, American hideouts. Payback too for the US bombing of Karg Island, Iran's most crucial oil hub. From Donald Trump overnight, a new call to arms. Hopefully China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK will send ships to the Hormuz Strait, he posted. In the meantime, the United States will be bombing the hell out of the shoreline. Iran's reply demands for America to leave the Gulf entirely or the war goes on.
And I hope you know we're actually losing the war, right? And I'm gonna tell you why, because Iran, they've been building, underground bunker systems, to basically be in alignment with their drone technologies and stuff underground. They've been building that shit for like 25 years. They've been building that shit, since, everything that started to take place with Iraq and, the infiltration of American soil. When you're talking about 9/11, they've been building this shit for about 25 years, so they prepared. So, and also, like I said, they can kill us from a financial standpoint too. But like I said, this is all pre-planned. This is nothing but a plan. They got to follow the script. The Bible is a Freemasonic playbook. You got to understand that it's nothing but a playbook that basically talks about the end of the Canaanite system. That's what it represents. That's what, the Bible represents.
The besieged nation continuing to bury military commanders and carry out rescue missions for civilian survivors. We just dug out 5 family members, he says. And in Lebanon, the suffering continues as Israel hunts for Hezbollah, the UN chief in Beirut, pushing for peace talks.
The diplomatic avenues are available.
And on the question of the war as well, those airstrikes, he says that the US hits on the critical oil facility of Karg Island have obliterated that, 90 targets hit. But he went on to say this, Sam, that they are, quote, we may hit that a few more times just for fun, unquote.
They were looking to do something here that was going to get a lot of attention. That is something that would fall within their group of targets. It is kind of believed that they have target folders already ready to go should that day ever come when they get operationalized. The fear is that this day has come.
And mind you, Donald Trump, in the beginning of this video, he said that they know where the sleeper cells are at. So if something actually takes place, I'm going to remember this video and I'm going to bring this motherfucker back up on here. So if you already know where the sleeper cells is at, and then you have a psychological operation happen on American soil, that means that you basically let the shit happen. Because like I said, Canaanite culture is based upon sacrifice. They got to sacrifice people in order to have some type of sustainability within this matrix system. That's how they have dominion. They keep having an energy exchange, which is a covenant, and a covenant is a contract with, dark forces, who are the archonic forces, right? So that's why I keep telling people, man, all this shit is really a plan. So they already told you they know where the sleeper cells is at. So if something happens, that's just kind of like, oh shit, we know where you at, but we ain't gonna tell you. If you know where they at, just have those people evacuate that geographical area. Y'all not gonna do it because y'all need a sacrifice.
On Tuesday, a top Iranian security official appeared to threaten President Trump directly, writing on X, even those bigger than you couldn't eliminate Iran. Be careful not to get eliminated yourself.
Okay, we got that. So we're going to get back to the transmission. Back to the transmission. Put the rice bowls in the chat. And get the likes up, man, so we can beat the video on the algorithm. So we're going to get back to the transmission. Okay, let me get my screen share going. Yeah, and about 60% of the people who watch the channel, they not subscribed. So hit that subscribe button, man, so we can push a lot of more of these videos in the algorithm. And hit that like button. Hit the like button. So another thing that's taking place, Iran is on a dark energy ley line 10, where you have Stargate 10. And then you got this going on. You got NASA confirms a boom in Ohio with 17,000-pound meteor. Now, they just came out saying something about how meteors in itself contain extraterrestrial DNA and things of that nature. I told you all the time, the perception of our imitates reality, because a lot of these meteors that they say that's falling from the sky is basically happening because you having the condensing of the compressed hydrogen that's falling from the sky ice. The sky ice is compressed hydrogen, and it's falling from the galactic war that's taking place outside the dome. So a lot of these meteors is actually coming from a debris of intelligence. So that's why you got to watch the movie Meteor Man, right? I talked about this movie already before many different times on this channel, but in the movie Meteor Man, it was a black man, a carbonated man, indigenous man on the planet. He basically interfaced with a meteor, and he basically galvanized the great majority of the gamma radiation that was coming from the ether. I mean, from the meteor. So that's where he was able to tap into his non-ether energies. Every book that he touched, everything that he touched, he was able to absorb the intelligence of it. So, I mean, in so many words, they telling you what time it is, because we also had a meteor hit in Blacksville, Georgia, the day before we had, the Stone Mountain event. So, meteors contain a certain intelligence. It can be from a galactic war, or it can be basically metaphysical, being dropped inside the firmament, that's coming from outside the firmament. So it tells you right here, there are multiple reports of explosion all over the Northeast Ohio. So this is basically talking about the same meteor, right? So meteors in itself contain metaphysical energies, right? It contains a certain intelligence. And this also was not a coincidence that during the time of the meteorites coming in, the United States government secretly registers alien.gov domain, hinting that aliens could actually be real, right? So why would they do that? This is nothing but soft disclosure. And then you got, as I demonstrated on the African Spirituality podcast, I was talking about how the harmonization of the four basic elements that harmonizes with the Christ energy, which is ether, it activates earth, air, water, and fire, which is, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So these are starting to be the final signs that's taking place. So because when you look at what just happened in America this week, you had a triple threat megastorm, you had a Hawaii went underwater, San Andreas fault moved, meteor exploded over Ohio, which I just got through talking about. Alaska earthquakes, Nebraska burned, Tennessee tornado struck, Tennessee, and then you got smoke over Midtown in NYC. Because like I said, the planet is going through an omnicron based state. That is basically the blueprint for fourth octave ether. And ether in itself, when it collaborates with the four basic elements, the four horsemen, earth, air, water, fire, it basically precipitates and activates the seven thunders, right? So these are the final signs that's taking place as you have these new energies that's coming in, a new intelligence during the time of Easter of 2026, where you have the regular star system. And they say that's actually, the time period of the resurrection of Christ from a celestial standpoint. So then you have the mega blackouts. You have the blackouts in Cuba, and the blackout in Cuba in itself, as of March 22nd, Donald Trump has served over 1,888 days as president. And Donald Trump in Sumerian Vedic gematria, Donald J. Trump equals 888. And 88 in itself, 88 is also a representation of the keys of papacy that unlocks the golden key and the silver key, right? When you're talking about the great horizon of the two celestial bodies of the sun and the moon. So that's why I keep telling people that Donald Trump represents Gemini, right? He's a trickster because he's playing both sides. He's operating on, the Aquarian and the Piscean age of darkness side at the same time. And then I talked about the Avengers. This movie's coming out. Not a coincidence they fly in the planes. So we're gonna get in some Q&A for a second. Put the rice bowls in the chat. We're gonna get into some Q&A. All right, let me get this back going up here. All right. Put some questions in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna answer a few questions because we already at the hour mark. And put the get the likes up and then put your questions in the chat. Salute to New Diamonds. Salute to Black Zionists. Salute to all the moderators in the building. Where y'all from? Where everybody from in the chat? You know what I'm saying? See what region, what type of, how many people we got in here from all over the United States. Yeah, I like Spider-Man, and you need you to understand something about that, is that when you get into Hopi mythology, it also talks about the Anunnaki spider that is connected to the cosmic web. Because when you get into the metaphysical energies of geomancy, it actually talks about certain ley line energy points, because they believe that the web in itself is what represents the electrical grid systems. And the electrical grid is what basically puts an encryption over the planet. When you go to Genesis chapter 3 and it goes through like verse 5, it talks about how Satan, Enlil, Yaldabaoth, Yahweh, Archon, who separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension and created the firmament. And the firmament in itself is what creates that web of energy to basically stagnate and pull on the energies of, humans and chosen ones. So, there's a lot of things when it comes to like a spider web or whatever. There's a lot of different mythologies that coincides with it. But they talk about the web inside Hopi mythology. Let me get some questions. The Cuban blackout, and just from my opinion, that is actually going to be the blueprint for what's going to be taking place here on American soil, right? It's kind of like the same thing when they deal with when you had DARPA and they created the cyber polygon, which is basically a simulated test run on how they're going to start to do certain psychological operations before it actually takes place. So Cuba in itself, it's just another way to basically, create this energy of draconian magic. So they got to put it in many different places first before they have the big sacrifice that takes place on American soil. They've been talking about a blackout that's going to be happening in America, in the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission documents. It talks about blackouts, and it's all connected to Iran. Yes, sir. So let me see. Let me get into some more. Oh, okay. Hey, B, what does your diet consist of, and what would you recommend? Because I eat mainly organic fruits and a lot of seafood. Like I said, I'm not nobody's dietitian. You know what I'm saying? Do what basically works for you. Do what works for you. Like right now, I'm going to be starting a juice fast pretty soon. So everything in moderation. Like my good friend Billy Carson, he said that he tried, like, I think it was the vegan. He tried some type of diet where he wasn't eating meat, and he almost died. So some of us is connected to certain bloodlines where we have to have, some type of meat diet. But like I said, everything in moderation. If you love seafood that much, what I'm saying, eat it every once in a while, because too much of anything is actually bad for you. So sometimes you just got to take a fast from, from certain things that you love, because that represents your evolutionary state. So just try to, stay balanced as much as possible. Okay. The firmament is actually a bad thing, because the firmament in itself is an electrical grid that basically subjugates energies, and it cuts you off from the magnetosphere, which is the mental plane. The mental plane is the fifth dimension, which is the personification of the God consciousness. But you also, the firmament also represents the square, because within the simulated energy extraction matrix is made up of subatomic particles, and those subatomic particles are cube shaped, right? If you ever pay attention, when you sneeze, your heart stops. That's the closest you get to death, when you sneeze. So when you sneeze, that is basically the embodiment of 0 point energy fields. When you at 0 point energy, you have the ability to basically stop time. It's kind of like the same thing as the Drake Sprite commercial, and he was in pieces or whatever. So when you sneeze, your heart stops, and you're able to see like particles, and you're basically looking at subatomic particles, because it's breaking the illusion of the reality. Because time doesn't necessarily stop until your heart stops, right? So the firmament in itself, that's why the great majority of everything is cube shape. The books is kind of like a cube rectangle. You got your TV, your phone, everything is in a cube shape, because you live in a simulated matrix system. Because cubes, what does it do? It extracts energy. It subjugates energy. Just like when you get into certain esoterics of witchcraft or whatever, when you want to do an incantation, sometimes they draw the circle and then they put the square over the circle to entrap the energy. It's an entrapment of spiritual energy, right? So it all coincides with the golden key and the silver key. The golden key represents the circle, which is the sun, and the silver key represents the moon, which is the square in the circle, right? Because a square and a circle was able to live on two different dimensional planes, because they both equate to 360 degrees, right? So that's why I was saying, everything is a cube shape. So that's what the firmament represents. It represents the cube of Saturn, right? That keeps you in a perpetual state of reincarnation, that's interconnected to the moon, which is a square, and the hexahedron that sits on the top of Saturn is actually a square, right? So that's why I said it's basically another way to entrap the energy. That's what the firmament does. And I talk about this all the time on the channel, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That is basically an encryption over the brain. That's why they say think outside the box. Because when you think outside the box, you're stepping outside the confines of the three-dimensional matrix, which makes up everything within the infrastructure of the firmament, right? So that's why, so the firmament is a representation of spiritual cutoff. That's what the firmament represents. It's nothing. It's basically putting shade over your shine. So the firmament is a motherfucking hater. You know what I'm saying? Just imagine like you thriving, everything in your life is going good, money up. You know what I'm saying? Everything is going great for you. But then you got that hater, man. Look, man, I don't like this nigga shining like that. This nigga doing too much. I don't like him. You know what I'm saying? He's starting to glow too much. Let's put this firmament over him to block his energy. That's what the firmament represents. The firmament is a hater, because right before, in the inception of time, you didn't have that motherfucking firmament, because the firmament works in tandem with the Saturn moon matrix, right? So in the inception of time, you had a sun cycle, and the sun cycle was basically the unification process of mind, body, and soul that is acclimated to the magnetosphere, the sun, and the carbonated man and a woman on the planet. So that was basically the unification process right there. So you didn't have a firmament that was basically blocking out the energy, right? So the firmament is a hater. It's cutting you off from your spiritual abilities. This is why you don't remember nothing. This is why you can't remember shit nowadays, right? You like, for instance, like, it's going to come down to the point where, I keep telling people all the time, think for yourself while it's still legal to, right? Because when you don't have the ability to think for yourself, you become acclimated to the box, and the box is what makes you an NPC, a non-playable character, because you cannot think outside the confines of the matrix. That's what makes a motherfucking an NPC. That's what makes you an NPC. Because you can't think outside the firmament. You can't think outside the energy extraction matrix, right? Which is the demiurge. You can't think outside the third dimension. So that's why I said, that's why they created, the draconian magic, to invert the information. I mean, things like, Simpsons, it has, some information in it, but like I said, it's nothing. It's gonna, you gotta read books, man. You gotta read books. You gotta watch old movies and read books. If you want to understand what the fuck is going on, watch old movies and read books, and then connect with an elder. That's how you do that. Because you don't want to just marginalize yourself to the point where you become an NPC because you be using, chat GBT too much. You got to use the chat GBT as a medium. You got to use it as an anchor for information. Okay. Archons do not have souls. Now, the reason I say that is because it tells you when you get into the esoterics of Gnosticism, the archons, they say that they mimic human behavior. Human behavior in itself is cultivated by way of emotions. So that means that they don't have emotions. In order to have a soul, you got to have emotion, because that means that you have to use your emotions as a navigation system, which is the blueprint for the hero's journey, which is the Christ. So you got to have a soul in order to reap the benefits of the Christ consciousness. But as an archonic force, they create the demiurge to subjugate the Christ energy. The demiurge in itself is what created the firmament. That's what it basically is, right? Because Earth in itself is a school for the soul, which is why when you break down school in ancient Hebrew, it means shield, which means soul. So the third dimension, which is the demiurge, which is controlled by the firmament, which is controlled by the archonic forces, they feed off human emotion, because human emotion in itself is connected to the energetic frequency of the soul. They don't have a soul, so they use artificial intelligence as a medium to mimic human behavior. So they cannot, they don't have the ability to, have a physical vessel, right? So they use an artificial intelligence and technology through oscillating signals and brainwave frequencies to infiltrate certain individuals and basically, become the host, basically. So archons, they don't have a soul. So that's why they use artificial intelligence as a negative mechanism to mimic human behavior. That's what's going on, right? That's what an archon is. So an archon in itself, they're basically the medium. Well, this is how everything goes. For those who don't understand the matrix system, when you're talking about, everything that's connected to your emotions, because I talk about in my book, the link is in the chat. I'll talk about how during the time of the Great Awakening period, your emotions in itself have to have an energetic balance, because the archons are the ones who created the firmament, and they put the two celestial bodies of the sun and the moon inside the firmament. And the firmament in itself is what controls, the great majority in cutting off the great majority of the human spiritual abilities. It's basically cutting you off from the center of the universe, right? Which is basically an encryption. So they created this three-dimensional apparatus of what I call the demiurge, energy extraction matrix. They created that to basically siphon the energy. And then they use parasites, right? They use mankind, because remember, Yakub, he said, I will create a people that will rule over you for 6,000 years. So he created a demographic of people who came up with corporations to basically create the energy of parasites, because parasites are actually the real is the real alien invasion. So the parasites that was created by mankind through the Food and Drug Administrations or whatever, because a lot of that stuff that a lot of us is subjugated by is basically biochemicalization. So you're not addicted to the food, you're actually addicted to the chemicals because the chemicals works in harmony with the parasites in the body to where they're able to replicate themselves. And the parasites is connected to the celestial body of the moon. And the moon is controlled by the firmament. It's an artificial celestial megastructure, and it's also controlled by the archonic forces. So a lot of times, when you're talking about people under demonic possession, you're basically talking about parasitical invasion. Parasitical invasion. That's all it basically is. So that's how they use this system. They use biochemicalization from genetically modified foods that's coming from the Food and Drug Administration that was created by mankind, and the parasites is basically feeding off human emotion, right? It's feeding off human emotion. So that's why you got to be balanced during the time of the Great Awakening period. Okay. Besides meditating, listening to 432 hertz, what else can I? Okay. Another way to raise up your frequency, because a lot of people don't understand this, listen to neoclassical music, right? Notice the word neoclassical, the prefix of the word neo, because neoclassical is acclimated to the neocortex of the brain, which is the neopallium. And the neopallium is what creates a tachyon of energy that creates the unification of a trinity principle within the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus gland, and the pineal gland. And that neural network in itself is what activates more neuron fibers. More neurons in the brain is actually a form of stimulation. So listen to like neoclassical music like Bach, Beethoven, and just let it play lightly because it makes the brain tighter. You cannot be holy until you use your whole motherfucking brain. That's what makes you holy, because you're raising up in consciousness. Because when you raise up in consciousness, you raise up a degree, right? A degree. That's why they talk about in Masonry, you raise up in degrees, right? So this is why they talk about climate change. So climate change is basically talking about the resurrection of human consciousness. The more we wake up, the more the ethers wake up. The more the ethers wake up, the more the planet wakes up. The more the planet wakes up, the more the sun wakes up. It gets hot when you conscious, right? So listen to neoclassical music. Neoclassical music is going to activate that neocortex, because also when you look at the word neo, you scramble it up, you get the word one, because the neocortex is what gives off the energy to the olfactory nerve to where you become the chosen one, right? That's why Neo was called Neo. He was the chosen one in the Matrix, right? Because the neopallium is the tachyon of energy of the Trinity principle. Neo needed Trinity: pituitary gland, hypothalamus gland, pineal gland, right? And that's what creates the philosopher's stone, right? Which is the activation of the pineal gland. So listen to neoclassical music, and also just listen to instruments. Listen to instruments too. Just tuning forks or whatever, because the tunes and the octave vibration is what actually tunes you up, right? So when you listen to certain instrumentations of music and classical music or whatever, you're basically tuning up your vibration so you can be in tune. There's a reason why they call it the organ, because certain octave vibrations that's coming from the piano and the organ is making your organs vibrate, because vibration in itself is what creates crystallization. And crystals in itself is created by way of pressure. So remember, I told you, you cannot be holy until you use your whole brain. How you use your whole brain is where the neuron fibers makes the corpus callosum a lot more tighter. And the tighter your brain in, the more that those crystals is going to be activated, because the crystals in itself, what does it do? Absorb and extract information, right? You have crystals in your brain. Yeah, because a lot of people who met me in person or whatever, yeah, I got crystals and stuff like that, but I don't really just go out, I'm not like I don't overguard myself with like a lot of spiritual stuff because I know whatever that I'm wearing is actually taking place in my body. So all the stuff, what I'm saying, that crystallization and everything is holding moldavite crystals and everything. It's already acclimated to your physiology already. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, but definitely listen to neoclassical music. It activates the serpentine mind, right? That's how you activate the serpent wisdom. If you want to resurrect the serpent mind, listen to classical music. Okay. um only thing I can say about that is because this says right here, cats liking squares mean anything? Because one thing from a occultic standpoint, when you're talking about Freemasonic magic, 90 degrees in a 90-degree angle is where you see a lot of apparitions. And a cat has the ability, this is why they got slitted eyes or whatever, because they able to see on two different dimensional planes at the same time. So a cat can see a human and an apparition at the same time. They can see non-corporeal entities while living in the matrix system at the same time. So a lot of times cats, they might be subjected to a 90-degree angle or square, or they like the, going corners or whatever, because they might see something in that geographical area of wherever the square is at. So cats, they can see inside of two different dimensional planes. Because I told you, a square represents a dimensional plane because it's 360 degrees. A square and a circle is both 360 degrees. Okay. Is the ego a parasite? And what is your thoughts, where they come from? Why negative thoughts pop up? Because the parasites is basically energetically connected to the brainwave frequencies that is being, facilitated by the electrical grid systems and the moon, which is a quantum satellite. So the ego is actually the embodiment of the demiurge. That's what the ego is. The ego is the demiurge because it basically creates a spiritual entrapment, right? You're basically in spiritual and mental and emotional hell. So your ego is actually a parasitical energy in itself because, like I said, balance is what creates the equilibrium aspect of God. You cannot be a God and you're able to balance out energies. So, but the parasites, as I demonstrated earlier, is coming from the biochemicalization from genetically modified foods, right? So the chemicals inside the food and the drugs is what creates this energy and pheromone to where the parasites go through a chaotic stage, and it basically breaks up your DNA. Because like I said, the more food, like a person on my 500-pound life, they're not addicted to the food, they're addicted to the chemicals, right? And the parasites replicate themselves through the chemicalization that's coming from the foods. So a lot of times when they, man, I want a big ass church, I want a big pizza, oh, give me a nut pizza, I want a cheeseburger now. That's not that's only happening because of the parasites is creating those pheromones in the body that's connected to those parasites. That's what's happening. So the parasites got to feed. It feeds on that body until it's able to become a sacrifice for the archons. Because you can eat yourself to death. You know what I'm saying? You can, you can love somebody to death. Like I said, your emotions is a part of the illusion. That's why I said you got to keep your emotions in balance. I ain't saying you got to be a motherfucking robot, but you got to make sure your emotions, don't have a chronic imbalance. Because if you have a chronic imbalance, this is where demonic possession takes over. And the demonic possession is actually an amalgamation of parasites in the body that is taking over the chemicals in the body and it's starting to control you. That's all demonic possession is really about. It's parasitical invasion, right? There's a reason why um, the pyramids of Giza, when you get to the bottom of it, it operates at 111 megahertz frequency. Why? Why is that? Because that is the resurrection number. That is the resurrection number because it basically transmutes. It's kind of like the same thing as far as conjugation, transformation, and transduction. Because you cannot go to hollow earth if you have a lot of parasites in your body. You cannot have, you don't get access to hollow earth because, like I said, because the parasites in itself is a form of energy extraction. You're already invaded from the inside, so they're not going to let you inside the planet. That's why, you got to go through the resurrection points as far as like, a lot of the pharaohs and everything. And even back during the times of Mesoamerica, the slope pyramids and also in the mounds, we used to bury our ancestors, right? Because that's how you get back to the Ethereal cosmic mother. But parasites definitely feed on the ego, right? And that's also another reason why, it just common sense. Because I told you everything as far as the square books and everything, that's why they put you inside a motherfucking coffin after you pass away. They put you inside of a coffin to basically cut off the spiritual energy to where you're not able to harmonize with the mycelium network of America or the landmass, right? Because when a person dies, you're supposed to put them right back into the earth to the point where animals and humans in itself who use the resources of the earth can learn from that individual's mistakes. Because like I said, anything that deals with a square or a rectangle, it's an entrapment of energy. That's what that's basically talking about. Everything is an energy extraction from the time you're born, because that's what the Babylonians said. The Babylonians said verbatim, you're born into sin because the Babylonians believed that the moon was called sin, right? Because it represents the cube. You got to understand sacred geometry and how it works in tandem with, cosmology and, the gematria body of what I talk about the physical body. Okay, let me get into another question. Salute to you, Florida 5592. And me and Rob, we're going to be back on here pretty soon. I talked to him the other day, so me and Rob going to be pulling back up with another transmission. There's a lot of stuff like chlorophyll. Go to Dr. Yaki's channel. He talks about he got all types of cleansers that you can do, for to extract all the parasites. So that's not my lane of work. I just like, I'm just a man of information, a man of eschatology, science of the end times. That's what I deal with. No, Bobby Hemmett is still alive. For those who keep saying that he passed away, he is still alive. And I know because Bobby Hemmett talks to Rod Hayes, and I talk to Rod Hayes all the time. Okay. I'm gonna get one more question in, and if you got some more questions and I didn't get around to your question, hit me on Instagram in the DMs. Hit me on my Instagram is at the bottom, and get the likes up and put the rice bowls in the chat. By the way, I'm gonna get one more good question in, and then get up out of here. I don't know too much about med beds, so I'm not finna. Okay. What are your thoughts on dreams and lucid dreaming and astral projection? It's a real thing. This is how you know. Once you have the ability to start controlling your dreams or whatever, that's how you know that you're basically breaking out of your gematria body. Because like I said, the gematria body is connected to the binary code. The binary is what subjugates the energetic frequency of the soul. The soul in itself is a representation of the Sahu or the Zohar body, which is the embodiment of your higher self. So a lot of times, you know, when you know that something is fake and you can see beyond the illusion and you can see beyond the cycles and the patterns or whatever, that's how you control your dreams and they become more lucid, right? They become a lot more lucid. So lucid dreaming in itself, a lot of people have the ability to do it, but as I said before, you have an encryption over the brain because, you know, you have the firmament. The firmament is what cuts off the great majority of people's spiritual abilities. And then they create the system with genetically modified foods. So that's a lot. That's another reason why a lot of people they don't remember their dreams, because it's the parasites is feeding off the energy of your lucid dreaming abilities and your astral projection abilities. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, you know, we're living in a time right now because there's not a lot of there's a lot going on, but it's a lot. It's not a lot going on to speak about. So everything, as far as like what's taking place in the news media and the geopolitical situations, everybody knows what the fuck is going on from a certain standpoint. But you know, I'm just coming to the forefront to show you guys in real time that this is nothing but a script. Everything they're doing is basically a script. So like I said, you can't just be, you know, one-dimensional with the information, you know, because right now during this time period, we got a full moon tonight, and then you got a new moon on April 1st, and then we're in retrograde, and retrograde in itself is nothing but a motherfucking test, right? Because like I said, you know, you got these new energies that's coming in, but in order to reap the benefits of those energies and in order to, you know, galvanize these new energies and the new intelligence that's going to be coming in during the time of April 6th, I think that's Easter. The Star Regulus. The Star Regulus constellation is supposed to be harmonizing with the Sphinx. That's the Christ energy. So the Christ is a consciousness that is going to be a new intelligence on the planet. So during the times of retrograde, this is basically a test to see if you upgraded. To see if you upgraded. Because there's scientists saying after this alignment, there's going to be a new way of thinking on the planet. Right? Because like I said, the more these neutrinos coming in, you got the cracks of the firmament. The firmament is going through a interface transition process. And then you also got this retrograde right now in Pisces. So that's the breaking of illusions, the breaking of the old world. So like I said, during this time period, you got the new moon tonight, full moon, whatever the case may be. All these celestial alignments is not by coincidence, because when you get into cosmology, you would know that the great majority of those energies from the planetary systems coincides with your physical vessel. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this video. I'll be back with another transmission. I should be coming back with maybe Rod Hayes pretty soon. But I appreciate you guys for tapping in with me tonight. End of transmission.
I know it's been a long time since I last called you back on your line. So I hope and I pray for your hand to help me on the ladder to the land. Karma's gonna get to you, and then you'll have a chariot with only one less friend. Now I had distant folks that are looking to my eyes to understand the wisdom he's given and his wealth from the skies. So thanks for this meal that I'm about to receive, and thank you for my health and all the good memories. thanks for the courage taking on another day. When I used to not believe, but now I know about grace. Stay away from the fire, cause the flames does burn. Go with your gut feeling, when it's wrong you learn. For every one step I take, the Lord takes two. And do unto others if you want it done unto you. It's me again, God, I know it's been a long time since I last called you back on your line. So I hope and I pray for your hand to help me on the ladder to the land. It's me again, God, I know it's been a long time since I last called you back on your line. So I hope and I pray for your hand to help me on the ladder to the land. This a completion, the selfish Proto-Grecian, Amerindian, Phoenician. I'm the last of the Mohicans, the bastard of the land, the pen, melanin, accretion. And we just trying to get back to the fact that we was kings and queens of a land before the avalanche seized it. I live on Turtle Island with the rest of the diseased. Better than the medicine for 7 different treatments. You try to ride away but end up getting seasick. The sleep can feel my words like Braille and they're awakened with the penmanship of Hindu script written in them vacant monastery honorary payments to the prototype. Tomorrow's only a day away, but nothing happens overnight. The fuck's wrong with going left when you know it's right? Biting off more than I can chew, that's an overbite. Black on black crime is like watching 2 soldiers fight when all along they was on the same page. History. It's me again, God, I know it's been a long time since I last called you back on your line. So I hope and I pray for your hand to help me on the ladder to the land. It's me again, God, I know it's been a long time since I last called you back on your line. So I hope and I pray for your hand to help me on the ladder to the land.